Hey, what's up guys, aarava here. Welcome back to a brand new video here today, and the brand new 1.05 patch has arrived for F1 2019, a huge patch for the car handling and performance in the game that will affect every single part of the game. There are other additions to it, things like fixing the AI in wet weather, F2 in multiplayer finally with unranked and whatnot, but the biggest change, the major change, is the car handling and the performance changes to the cars relative to each other for career mode especially. But the car handling itself also has drastically changed. The cars will be up to 1 to 1.2 seconds faster, we were told. I'm going to be testing that in this video later on with a hot lap around Australia in the Alfa Romeo racing car and comparing it to my very first hot lap I did in career mode Australia. We'll be doing it in Grand Prix mode, so it should be theoretically the same exact car. You know, the base car in the game in Grand Prix mode is the car you start off with in career mode, so it should be the best comparison we can do. But before we get into that, we're going to look through the comparison of the teams and see which teams have moved up and down in what way with the engine, chassis, and aero side of things. I've already been tweeted, yesterday when the patch actually went live for the PC. I'm not too sure when it's going live for Xbox or PS4, because generally for the consoles, it does take a little bit longer because they have to try and get it, all cleared with Sony and Xbox, and it has to go through checks, basically, a bit more rigorous checks than it does on PC with Steam. So I'm not too sure when the console patches will come out, but the PC one went live yesterday, and already people were tweeting me asking me if I was going to do a video like this to compare the different teams, just so obviously if you've not started your career mode, you can kind of get informed of how things have changed, or if you are in the middle of your career mode but you don't really know how the teams have changed exactly, it's not very clear, this will hopefully try and make it clear to you, because what we've got is screenshots from the very first episode I did of career mode, again Australian Grand Prix, so the pre-patch car specs basically, and now I've gone and created a new career mode save just so we can quickly see what the cars are like right now. So that'll be the best way we can compare it right at the start with no player or AI upgrades added onto the cars. This will be the clearest way we can see what teams have gone up and down in what department and overall where they sit in the standings now. Right, so we're going to start off with the engine department, and on this year's game, right now the engine matters quite a fair bit. Maybe unlike real life, in the game it really does matter. We've seen the Williams car very, very rapid in career mode races, even early on in career mode season 1, just due to the fact it's got a great engine underneath it. So they have generally nerfed a little bit here and there of the engine power, so hopefully that maybe removes some of the kind of OP kind of nature of having a good engine, but I still think it's going to be quite important just with the way the F1 game is versus real life. The slipstream, the dirty air, it's not much of a factor, dirty air, and the slipstream is a lot more powerful in the game in general than it is in real life, in a kind of good way. Obviously it allows great overtaking, great battles, but it does mean sometimes, especially at tracks like Italy, it gets a little bit ridiculous, but they have done some changes to it. You can see, if we flick through, you'll notice which one is the post-patch, because this screenshot will be a little bit darker. I don't know why, but the post-patch screenshots are a little bit darker, a bit more contrast on the photo, and the pre-patch is a little bit lighter, but I'll also slap on I'll slap on a little indicator on the bottom left so you know what is post-patch and pre-patch. But essentially, you can see Mercedes have been knocked down a little bit on the engine side of things. Williams have generally stayed the same enough. They've got down a little bit as well, and Racing Point have also been reduced a little bit. So all Mercedes cars have been nerfed a tad, but everyone else, you'll notice as well, has been changed a tad. You've seen the Ferrari engines, Ferrari, Haas, and Alfa Romeo all go up a little bit. I would say maybe the Mercedes engines all went down, the same amount Ferrari engines went up. So overall, Ferrari have gained kind of double the upgrade essentially relative to Mercedes essentially, which is obviously the case in real life. We've seen the Ferrari engine much more equalised to the Mercedes this year, especially in most cases actually with the Ferrari with less downforce than compared to the Mercedes, has been the better kind of engine package and better kind of power package compared to the Silver Arrows. But we now also look at the Renault teams and Honda, and you can see they've actually been given a little nerf. So all of the Honda engines, so Red Bull and Toro Rosso, and the Renault power teams, Renault and McLaren, all given the same little nerf. The nerf, I would say, is probably the same size as the one Mercedes got. So generally speaking, perhaps all the Renault and Honda power teams will maybe suffer a little bit in a straight line now. You'll maybe notice the Ferrari cars are a bit faster, the Ferrari powered cars effectively, and the Mercedes ones will be a little bit slower, but I doubt you'll already notice the Mercedes ones too much, especially the actual Mercedes Works team there. But I'm hoping it will make a little difference to the Williams car. Also, obviously, drag and aero will come into that as well. But that's the change for the engine side. Not much. It's not a drastic change on the engine side. No one's gone up or down in terms of the pecking order. Everyone's just changed values essentially. I think the only guys that have actually changed are my bad. Actually, there is one change, and it's quite a small one, is McLaren and Toro Rosso. So previously, Toro Rosso were the worst engine on the grid, and now it is McLaren, which is a little bit odd, obviously, because McLaren in real life are one of the fastest cars in a straight line in terms of the midfield pack, but that's more due to their reduced drag, I would say, rather than the engine power. The engine power would be kind of the same as Renault, but obviously for the game, they've said the Works team is going to get a bit more of a powerful engine, which kind of makes some logical sense in game terms. And like I said, the actual straight line speed is affected also by drag, and in real life, that's why the McLaren's more kind of quick in a straight line compared to the Renault and compared to other midfield teams. It's not their engine, in fact, it's more kind of so their kind of very efficient aero package and car in general. We now move to the chassis side of things, and this is where things get a little bit more drastic in terms of changing the pecking order and whatnot. So in all of this, Red Bull remain the same, but everyone's got a major nerf on the chassis. You can see actually just all the general bars have gone down by quite a fair bit there, but Red Bull remain top. Mercedes moved from third best chassis on the grid to second best ahead of Ferrari. Makes sense, of course. Mercedes have a very solid chassis. Ferrari, we thought they did, but obviously now we know it's a little bit weaker, along with their aero as well. And you can see there's a bigger gulf now from Red Bull and Merc to Ferrari now. Ferrari are closer to McLaren than they are to the top two of Red Bull and Mercedes. So Ferrari have really been done dirty in this patch, but for a good reason, obviously. In real life, they really aren't that great on the chassis and aero side of things. They're playing a lot of catch-up still, and the only thing that's saving them a lot of the time is their engine, a la kind of, the Canadian GP, for good example, of course. We can see on the chassis side, in terms of the midfield team, McLaren, huge bump up. They're now the fourth best chassis on the grid, whereas they were the third worst going into it there. So I think that was a bit of a legacy chassis value from last year's McLaren car, and now obviously they've majorly fixed everything, and the car's actually a very good base now to upgrade from, so they are now ahead of every other midfield team, as so they should be. Haas, they've remained the same, so they've not really changed too much. You've got to remember, these performances will be taken from kind of Australia and the kind of first few races, I would imagine, for even this patch late on into the game, a few weeks on, even though we're already at the British GP, the values they would have taken, they have to take them from earlier on this season, because they have to do a lot of testing with the AI to make sure everything works well, and also the cars themselves make sure they react correctly, so they've probably had to take earlier performance updates. So this was before we kind of knew the Haas had this major issue in the race, and with tyre wear, and obviously that's a chassis thing, because in the R&D chart, the tyre wear is on the chassis side of things. So I would imagine if there's another patch down the line, the Haas will get majorly nerfed in the chassis side of things, but unfortunately right now, they are the exact same thing. But if you look back at the very first race of the season, it is pretty much where Haas were in terms of, the pecking order. They were kind of actually looking okay in that first race, deceivingly, obviously, as it may be. Renault have been moved down. They were fourth earlier on in the chassis side of things. They're now below McLaren and Rich Energy, Haas, so they moved 3 places down, effectively. They're ahead of Toro Rosso, who have stayed put where they were, because Racing Point have been the ones that swapped around and moved below Toro Rosso. They were ahead of them beforehand, which is making sense, because Racing Point haven't been that strong as of late, and Toro Rosso now are starting to maybe try and get some good points. They're actually level on points with Haas right now in the season, and they may be looking to chase after Racing Point, so makes sense there. Alfa Romeo, though, they stay the same, the second worst team on the grid, ahead of Williams. The gap from Williams to Alfa Romeo stays the same pretty much as well in terms of the chassis. Obviously, everyone got nerfed, so the bar's actually smaller there, but I'm surprised, to be honest, because I don't feel like the Alfa Romeo chassis is that horrendous, and I think Alfa Romeo in general do still need a bump up, but like I said, like Haas still need a further nerf, I think Alfa Romeo need a further bump up here. I guess based off maybe Australia, they weren't super strong, but they showed better race pace and qualifying pace perhaps in Australia, Melbourne, if I remember back correctly. So it kind of half makes sense there, but I feel like they definitely needed a little bit of bump, and maybe should have been just ahead of Racing Point and Toro Rosso perhaps, or maybe a level on chassis with Toro Rosso. We now move on to aero. Now this was very interesting at the very start of the game, because I did not agree that Williams weren't the worst on aero, and that's the first thing I notice here, is Williams have been sunk down so much. They are now very much the worst on aero. Alfa Romeo have been given a massive bump up. They pretty much match what Racing Point used to be pre-patch, and Williams have been chopped down by about half their aero there. So now Williams is going to be a real struggle road to glory in terms of the aero side of things. In terms of the top teams, you can see Ferrari have been given a tiny nerf. Red Bull have been given a bigger nerf, though, along with Mercedes as well. So Ferrari is still the top team in terms of aero, which is interesting because, I mean, obviously Mercedes have definitely got more downforce. I don't know if this kind of takes us to the fact that Ferrari have a very low drag package. It may do. You got to remember with aero, with the performance chart, drag and front downforce and rear downforce comes into it. So it might just just be a lot of drag, which is bringing that bar up for Ferrari, whereas with Mercedes and Red Bull, maybe the fact that they've lost so much maybe means that the game has added a lot more drag onto the Red Bull and Mercedes car. McLaren have jumped up and they swapped positions with Renault there, so Renault now are the 5th best team and McLaren are the 4th best on aero. I would agree with that. Obviously, McLaren and Renault are locked into a battle right now in terms of the constructors, and so with the aero side of things, I think Renault are playing a bit of catch-up to McLaren there. They've said many times they're now aiming for McLaren in terms of comparison, so makes perfect sense there. Then you've got Toro Rosso behind Renault ahead of Haas. Previously, Haas and Toro Rosso were the other way around, so those two have now swapped, which, again, I would probably agree with. You know, Haas have been pretty weak now as of late, so Toro Rosso should be maybe ahead of Haas at this stage, and then Racing Point stayed put, and obviously, like I said, the swap was with Williams and Alfa Romeo at the bottom, so generally I do agree with a lot of those swaps there for the aero, and in general, everyone, though, has increased in terms of their aero bars, because obviously we've gained some of that kind of high-speed cornering downforce that Codemasters have said this patch would bring in terms of the car handling, and also car characteristics have apparently been changed. Obviously, I've not had time to test every single car. I've not even driven every single car outright anyways, pre-patch, so now I can't actually even tell you how every car feels different, you know, in terms of characteristics, because I've only ever driven really the Alfa Romeo car. I can tell you about that though, so we're now going to go into a comparison here. We're going to play a clip of this is qualifying in my actual career mode series, episode number 2 from the Australia Grand Prix, you know, a few weeks back, recorded all the way at the start of the game, and we'll look through that lap, and then we're going to compare to the new lap with the Grand Prix mode post-patch. So obviously at the start of the game, I was pointing out there was a lot of understeer in these F1 2019 cars, especially the Alfa Romeo, which really just didn't have very great aero. I mean, you saw there straight away with the bars that the aero jumped up quite a fair bit, so already I'm expecting on the new lap the car to be feeling so much better in high-speed corners. You know, that flat-out, usually flat-out right-hander there we just went through wasn't flat-out in the Alfa Romeo car, which is a little bit disappointing to see, because pretty much every car, bar maybe the Williams car, was able to take that flat-out in quali, so I'm looking to see that kind of direct comparison. Also, the chicane high-speed there as we go towards Sector 3, that was very iffy. I always felt on edge at that chicane and never felt like I could really chuck the car in flat-out commitment, and that's exactly what Cody's think they're going to bring with this patch, is higher speed, high-speed downforce essentially, and more confidence on the higher speed corners, and generally speaking, just better lap times essentially. Obviously, a lot of that will be brought with that mid-corner speed. So now we're going to compare it to the new lap. We're going to be in Antonio Giovinazzi's car. Obviously, that's the same car I'm actually driving in career mode, because obviously I've replaced Giovinazzi in career mode, but this is Grand Prix mode, but effectively, theoretically, these should be the exact same cars. You know, starter career mode should be the base Grand Prix car mode. So here we go into turn 1. Already turn 1, I can say, felt so much better. The turn-in, the front felt so much more responsive as we went toward the apex, and then here it was fully flat out the right hander. A little bit of a correction there as we hit the curb a little bit, that offset the car, but it was so much better through that right hander. I could actually have confidence of going flat out, never even thinking about lifting off my foot there through the throttle, and then through the high speed chicane on the exit curb especially, felt a lot more grip, a lot more confidence to get the throttle down a lot earlier mid corner there. So really, you really could tell the difference. And speaking to other creators like Tom97 as well, he felt the same thing in his Ferrari car, that you can really feel the high-speed difference here. So if you did play F1 2019 before the patch, I implore you to check it out after this patch now, and you will really feel the difference. Every single car should feel a lot better to drive, and you can actually physically see the lap time difference and improvement there is just about 1 second compared. So obviously, now with a few weeks gone, I may have sped up a little bit on F1 2019. I can't deny that, so that's maybe affected things by maybe a tenth or two, I'm saying, but it's not going to affect it by an entire second. I've definitely not got faster by a second just on pure driving skill. That is more just the car. So, like Cody said, 1 to 1.2 seconds improvement. I would say for the Alfa Romeo, that's definitely the case. 1 second there. Maybe on some of the other cars, the higher end cars, or the higher midfield tier cars, which have really changed, especially McLaren for sure, has probably gone up by 1.2 seconds, I would say. So, yeah, they weren't lying about the speed up there. I don't know it's quite matching real life quite yet. I think looking at Twitter, it's still a little bit slower than real life, so they maybe need to do a little bit more tweaking there, but it definitely has sped up by quite a fair bit. So we'll be seeing the races and the lap times tumbling down the order as we go through career mode for sure. But the good thing is the cars do feel so much better high speed, so much more responsive on the front end, I would say, even with the base car. Still a little bit of understeer there, but that's what we want, because obviously it's realistic to have some understeer in F1 cars, because the F1 cars do understeer in general compared to the kind of lower categories or other racing cars in general, and it's a better handling model for it. But there's a little bit less over-exaggerated on this year, I feel, especially with cars like the Alfa Romeo, the bottom end of the spectrum, and they actually do have a bit more biting on the front end. So it's going to make things a little bit more enjoyable, and will definitely shake things up for your career modes in terms of performances. I wanted to have this update come in after I'd done Abu Dhabi in my career mode. Unfortunately, Steam forced me to do the update, so I was wanting to have Season 1 completely uniform pre-patch, and then Season 2 post-patch. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get that luxury, and so into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, that episode will be coming out tomorrow. That will be my first time in career mode with the patch, so definitely tune into that to see how things go with that, how things get affected in my career modes. But that's been this video then, an update, a full update and kind of test of the patch 1.05 for F1 2019. Hope you guys enjoyed it and found it informative. If you did, be sure to smash the like button, and if you are new around here to subscribe for weekly full-on content, I've been over. Have a good day. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.